This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to Marija Ristić. She's a regional director of the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network, and she's going to be explaining to us what is actually going on the ground with the protests in Serbia. Now, there's been a lot of lazy reporting, to be honest. The West is kind of saying, oh yeah, these are just coronavirus lockdowns. People are clashing with the police because they don't want to go back into lockdown. That's actually not true. The coronavirus has been kind of used by the increasingly authoritarian government in Serbia to put more control on the people. The police have been incredibly violent. So Marija is going to explain to us this very confusing situation on the ground in Serbia. If you like what we're doing, please help Popular Front keep moving forward. Go to patreon.com/popularfront. Yeah, so as I was just saying, like, the media in Western Europe and the US are kind of framing these clashes in Serbia as like, oh, it's coronavirus protests, they don't want to be locked down. Now, if you do 5 minutes research, you see there's a lot more to it. But maybe you can tell us, from your perspective, why is this happening right now?
The rise of the COVID cases definitely provoked people to go out on the streets, and not just the rise, but more the response of the government on the rise of the COVID cases provoked people to go out. But why are they on the streets? It is more related to the overall state of democracy in Serbia, and in general, different kind of, I would say, circumstances or events that led to the rise of COVID. We were the first country that had elections since the pandemic. And during the elections, the government, I would say, completely ignored the COVID cases and even did the cover-up of the numbers. So people were told that we defeated COVID, that the COVID cases are quite low, and that is the reason why we have elections. And only after the elections took place, which was on the 21st of June, the government and the crisis staff that is in charge of dealing with the COVID pandemic started to saying that the numbers are rising, and then they attempted to impose the lockdown. Obviously, people's reaction was, you cannot do this now because the elections are done. So in that sense, I think they were quite furious, because it shows that the government actually only cares about itself and not about the public health as it would be expected.
Right, so the government was kind of orchestrating the numbers to fit themselves to be able to control what's going on, essentially.
Yes, exactly. So we had quite, I would say, harsh approach to how to deal with the COVID cases from the beginning. So the government imposed quite strict lockdown since March, and people were in lockdown, for example, for 3 to 4 days. People older than 65 were in complete lockdown. They had only like weekly slots to go outside. So in that sense, the government initially had this quite, I would say, strict approach how to deal with the crisis, unlike many European states. So it looked like more like China than, for example, Germany. And then there was a sudden change in the policy towards COVID. And 2 weeks before the election, they decided to completely ease down the measures. And that was explained by the fact that the numbers are lower And this is the story that they were telling until the elections. So if you look, for example, the chart on the COVID cases in Serbia, you would see that in that period, for example, of 1 week, you had only one person dying every day, which didn't happen anywhere. And in that period, we were starting, as a journalist, we were starting to receive different kind of warnings from doctors, from patients, different citizens, that the numbers are actually quite different, that they're bigger, and that there is an overall cover-up of the numbers. But we couldn't prove that until we actually got access to the state information system, where we saw that the number of cases is quite bigger, and it's much more bigger than the one the government presents.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. So then that all kind of blew up when, I think last Sunday maybe, they all, like, protesters gathered and they stormed the parliament building, right? Tell us about that. What happened?
So yes, I think that first protest was quite a protest of people who were angry. So it was very spontaneous. It was right after the president of Serbia came out and said that he will impose the lockdown. So people started spontaneously gathering in the center of the city, basically out of rage. And I think this entering the parliament was also for the same reason. So people were quite angry and out of rage. They wanted to enter the parliament and in a way show this issue that they have with the overall system. A lot of people are also calling the demonstration in Serbia as anti-system demonstration. So in a way, the parliament in Serbia always represented this institution that represents the system. When we throw Milosevic in 2000, people initially stormed the parliament building. So it has like this quite symbolic thing in our history or in our democracy, and people always gather in front of the parliament. So it was in a way an attempt to show that it's the system that is actually the one that is responsible for not tackling the COVID crisis responsibly.
Right, so it wasn't like just a normal thing. That was quite a big deal, the fact that the parliament got stormed. Like, it's symbolic.
Yes, exactly. So in as I said, in Serbian political culture, storming the parliament meaning that you are against the system and that you want the system to be changed. So in a way, it's some kind of message, and that's actually resonates from 2000 much more, like after Milosevic fell down. But the storming of the parliament was not successful, and they tried to do it the 2 days after as well, but there were a lot of police, and it was actually at the end prevented.
Yeah, well, they got in a little bit, right? There is some footage of them actually inside, but quite quickly they were out.
Yeah, so the first day they managed to enter and they stayed there, I think it was 5 to 10, maybe 15 minutes. And then the police forces actually forced them out of the parliament building.
Right, and then the next night, the police, from the videos that I've seen and friends I have there that I'm talking to, you know, who are amongst the protests and whatever, said that, like, you know, the police came down extremely heavy on them.
Yes, so even on the first day of demonstration, but especially on the second day, police used excessive force in many cases. We as a journalist documented at least 26 cases where we had footage which shows that the police used excessive force towards protesters. And in general, they were using quite a lot of tear gas in the first 3 days. Beyond tear gas, they were using a lot of violence, beating of people. There were a lot of police in civilian clothes. In that sense, also violating human rights conventions because people didn't have an idea that next to them is a police officer or not. Then they were basically caught in parks, on benches, on streets. A lot of them got arrested as well. The state still claims that the police acted in line with the law, which is also quite problematic. And we had a lot of organizations, both internally but also internationally, from Amnesty International to Council of Europe and Commissioner for Human Rights, who said that basically the force that the police used was quite excessive and that there needs to be an independent investigation into this.
Yeah, I mean, the videos are brutal. There's one specifically where there's about 5 police come around a guy who's already on the ground, just start battering him with like truncheons, and they move along, and then the next load come and beat him, and then the next load come and just move him out the road. Like, and then there's, footage where the guys are sitting down having a drink on a bench, they just get smashed around the head. Like, it seems like the police have been told to be, basically to like fuck everybody up. Do you think that's the case? Like, the government has kind of said, yeah, go in heavy.
Definitely, I think Serbian police has a historical issue with using a lot of force or unnecessary force or unuseful force. So in that sense, Serbian police has always been brutal. So in that sense, the Serbian state never developed police that has democratic culture, so to say. So in Serbia, police is always sent to do very nasty things for the state. And it is often perceived like it is a force above the law. And looking, for example, into the period before 25 years when there was a war, police was always sent to do dirty business. After the war, there was never a proper reform of the police because police was always too powerful. And no one actually dared to tackle this issue of overall impunity of the police. So now you have this mix of generations. So you have this old generation that took part in the war and that stayed in the police and is in a way aware of this, so to say, inability of the state to tackle any kind of issues within the police. And then you have the new generation, which also has quite dodgy record. In a way, you have people who take part as hooligans in the games, or people who are part of different kind of organized crime rings. So it was always a very, so to say, dodgy institution that had its own rules how it operates. And I think this clearly showed this. And I can bet 100% that none of the police officers will ever be prosecuted for this, like they never have been prosecuted for any of misdeeds they did in the past. So in a way, I would say that for sure they got a green light from the government, but it's also internal issue how the police perceives themselves and what's their role.
Right, like it's already normal for them to do that. It's not like they stepped it up.
Exactly. I mean, there are for sure people within the police who would consider some things unethical or problematic. But I'm speaking about like this overall morale and ethic of the police, where the majority actually goes out at the street and beats the citizens for no reason, simply because they think this is the way how things should be done.
Yeah, the police, bloody hell. I've seen, like, first of all, some people were saying already, like, day 2, they were like, oh, there are undercovers, there are instigators. And, as you know better than I do, any kind of protest in the Balkans, there's always that rumor, right? There's instigators, there's state instigators. But when I looked at some of the footage, it seems like that's actually true, right? There seems to be, like, I mean, I don't know if they're police or what, but people working with the police who are not dressed up as police, kind of throwing stuff, running into things, and then before you know it, they're helping the police arrest people. Like, I mean, what is all that about?
Yeah, as you said, we saw a lot of people who seemed in a way affiliated with the police, but we couldn't really figure out who they are. And I think one of the reasons for that is simply because our police is quite connected with the, so to say, underground. So the police in general has quite close relation, so to say, with the hooligans that I mentioned, who are running different kind of football fan clubs, who have very controversial past.
A lot of them are like fascist ultras, right?
Exactly. So some of them are, as you said, fascist, far right. Some of them are also like criminal. They do organized crime things, drugs, smuggling of different things, etc. So in that sense, the police already has this group of people working for them who have very troubling personalities. Then in general, I think the other issue is that the Serbian society is also, as a society, is a society that has a lot of far-right groups. So it's in a way more orthodox than any other around it, so to say. So a lot of far-right groups are normalized. And these far-right groups often cause violence and often have very troubling means of, so to say, having their goals met. And they have not been ever held accountable for any of that. So for them, it's completely normal to throw stones, to rob things, to attack people offline, online. So I think with this protest, you had a merge of everything. So everyone came with a different idea about protest and different goals about protest. And I think this protest actually showed like these deep divisions and polarizations within Serbia.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend who said that like every group possible is there. Like there's also footage as well of like young students throwing bottles at like the fascists that turn up because they're like, we don't want you here. And then the fascists are fighting with other people. Then there's some on the side of the police. Like, who would you say is the main? I don't know. Maybe there is not a dominant group, but like generally, would you say that there's specifically a group of people there that are kind of trying to push it forward? Because right now it seems a little bit directionless.
Yes, I think it was direction. It didn't have direction from the beginning. What brought them together was this outrage. So all of them first night felt an extreme outrage towards the government and how it is in general handling the country and where the country is going, etc. Then you had people who are liberals, you had people who are on the right spectrum, you had people who are confused, you had also leftist, then you had different, basically everyone who in a way felt some kind of dissatisfaction, they were coming to the protest. Then on the second night, you saw more prominence of these far-right groups who wanted basically to use the momentum of the overall dissatisfaction to actually bring more people of their alliance, so to say, to the protest. Through violence, through attacking the police, attracting more young people, etc. This then led these people who have moderate stances not to take part anymore in the protest. And then that lead us to the issue that we have with the protest in Serbia, not just now, but I think in the period of the last 2 to 3 years. And that is basically that there is no one who can generate this outrage of the citizens with the current system, simply because there is no leadership among the opposition movement. So you don't have clear vision among those who oppose to Vučić what could be the step or what could be the steps that need to be taken in order to overthrow the government. So everyone has different reasons why they hate the government, but they cannot basically have this uniting force that can lead them to a change. So some would say, I don't want to go with this person because he's far right. Other would say, I don't want to go with this person because he's corrupted. The third would say, I'm leftist, I want someone who represents left ideas. So it's very fragmented society, and there is no one in the opposition, neither like among the official opposition parties, but also among the citizens movement, who would be this unique figure that would gather maybe a larger group of people around some kind of goals.
Right. Well, let's talk about Vučić then. I saw he's been in power, right, since 2014 more or less, and he's now becoming like increasingly authoritarian, right? Can you talk about him and everything they're up to? Because obviously they've made a lot of people angry.
Yes, so Vučić is in power, as you said, I think in different roles in the country from 2012. His party, actually, to be precise.
Right.
And he is now the president of Serbia, but also the president of his party. His ruling party, Serbian Progressive Party, won at the elections more than 60%. So they are more than a majority, so to say, and they are officially and unofficially, however you want to call it, control it all levels of power in Serbia, and they control almost every element of the state, because we don't really have free judiciary, free media, so everything more or less is under control of Serbian Progressive Party. And Vučić had these authoritarian tendencies from the beginning, so he was always an authoritarian leader. He also has a very authoritarian past. He was affiliated with the war criminal who was convicted by the ICTY for the war in Serbia and Croatia. But now his grip on power is just huge. So like 5 years ago, you had some elements that were clearly independent. You had sort of independent institutions, but in his course of ruling in the last 5 years, he managed to destroy every independent voice in the country. And you clearly see that in these elections, where you basically didn't have any kind of opposition entering the parliament. So it's more or less one-party state. Not fully, but it has all elements. So the police is controlled by Vučić. Every independent institution, like Agency for Corruption, for anti-corruption, is controlled by the government. Most of the mainstream media are either government funded or government controlled. Judiciary is quite weak, so there are no big cases. Judges and prosecutors don't dare to rule independently. And yeah, parliament we don't have it's mostly out of the Serbian Progressive Party. So in a way, it looks like it's moving towards Russia in terms of political system, or Turkey.
Wow. Okay. So it's becoming like dictatorship by default, essentially.
Exactly. And I mean, the reasons for that are, one is, of course, that Vučić is very pragmatic leader, and he controls a lot of the elements of the state, but it's also that the opposition is almost non-existent. So the people who would confront Vučić, they absolutely don't have support among the people, because the people don't recognize them as genuine opposition force of the current government.
The thing is, though, what I can't quite work out is, like, he obviously has a lot of support, but then there are also these protests which are pretty big.
Yes, but that's quite in a way difficult and easy to explain. So Vučić generates a lot of support across Serbia, and we always like to say in Belgrade that Belgrade is not Serbia. Belgrade was always considered to be the most liberal. It was always the city that had big sort of critical mass, so to say. And it was always different. So if you look at Belgrade, you would think that a lot of people are opposing Vučić, simply because you have protests, people are unhappy. You would also, like, if you are on social media, you would see that there are a lot of people who are seen in a way as quite critical to the government. But outside of Belgrade, there is very limited opposition to anything that Vučić is doing. And Serbia, in that sense, is quite a big country, and a lot of Vučić voters live outside of Belgrade. Why they vote for Vučić is simply because they are, so to say, victims of his propaganda. So people outside of Belgrade don't have access to free media. They don't have access to multiple sources that will inform them about the government corruption, and they only get information from these local media outlets that in most of the cases are heavily government controlled. So their access to information is quite poor. And in general, political culture in Serbia is quite poor itself. And this perception of democratic participation, culture of critical thinking, it's also not on a great level. So in that sense, it's quite easy to, so to say, control the masses. This is not something that Vučić invented. If you look at history of Serbia, you would see that we had quite authoritarian leaders in the past as well. We had Tito for many years. After that, there was Slobodan Milošević. Then we have a brief period of democratic transition, but still strong personalities. And after that, it was Vučić. So in a way, it's very, very difficult to change this perception among people that there is a leader who will save us. And in this case, the only leader that appears is Vučić. So as I said, if you look for people who follow Russia and Turkey, it's quite similar. Like how people, for example, outside of Moscow perceive Putin, or how people outside of Istanbul perceive Erdogan. And it's very similar.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it, definitely. It's kind of the new technique of these, wannabe dictators that know that they can't go in with the hard boot as firm as perhaps they could have. So it's, they slide into it. It sounds like that's what he's done.
Exactly. And it's also, the other thing is that their leadership lasts long. So it's years and years working on building a system that works in favor of one party. So Vučić didn't do this in 2 years. So he was doing this in course of 8 years. and he is also very pragmatic and very smart. And in that sense, he made the system working in favor of him and his party.
Right. Yeah. And what is his, the government media? What have they actually been saying about the protesters?
Most of the government media were saying that the protests are organized by far-right groups. That is one narrative. The other narrative is that there is a foreign factor. Some people say it's Russia. Some people say it's neighboring countries, probably thinking of Montenegro, because Montenegro and Serbia are currently not in so good relation. And that the overall attempt is to overthrow Vučić and to turn country into the chaos. So this is what most of the pro-government media are saying. Also, a lot of them are in general ignoring the protests. For example, the Serbian public broadcaster didn't have anything on protests on the first day. Only on the second day, they had limited coverage, third day as well. So it's a mix of denial and propaganda.
Right, to be expected. Maybe you can talk a bit about the authoritarianism that we've seen within the protests. I've seen in the last couple of days that protesters have gone from getting beaten around the head to kind of disappearing. Like, people are getting locked up for 30 days for just holding up a sign. There is some people are just saying they don't know where their friends are. Like, what's going on?
So yes, we actually also don't know how many people are for real arrested and how many people are detained and under which rules or laws or regulations the police did this. So this links to my previous answer, and that is that the police is basically not run by any rules of transparency in general. And I know as a journalist, if you want to find out anything that is related to the police, you either have to have a very good source within the police who wants to tell you things, or you will never find out, or you will find out in the course of 30 to 40 days. And in that sense, the police response also was quite depending on case by case. So in some cases, they will decide to lock someone for 30 days. In some cases, they will decide on the spot to release someone. So it's quite arbitrary. And there are no sanctions for anything that they have been doing. And to get any kind of information is quite difficult. For example, this morning, I saw a post about a person who was working as a researcher at the State Institute for Philosophy, who was arrested at the protests as disruptor and foreign influence, etc., and ordered custody of 30 days. So a lot of independent people were protesting against that, calling the police to issue some kind of statement, but still, we don't have any kind of information. On the other side, the government fully stand behind what the police has been doing. The government said that the police didn't use any excessive force, that they were responding to the growing violence, and that their response was legitimate. So in a way, there is no one who at this point will force anyone from the police forces to come out and give the exact data. I mean, I know that human rights organizations are preparing lawsuits, but considering that our judiciary is quite slow and it's quite also controlled and political, it will take years to get any kind of response from the judiciary. And then, I mean, in 2 or 3 years, I think it will be already quite late to respond to any of the violations.
Yeah, exactly. And the government could then just say, like, so what? Do you know what I mean? The amount of power they have now already, it's just going to get more, I reckon. Where do you think these protests are heading? You know, like each day it seems to be getting more disorganized, but there are still quite high levels of violence and there are still people coming out. What do you think is going to happen?
We will for sure know more what will happen this week, because I think this week will be quite crucial for protests in order to see whether they will continue or not. We had less people during weekend, but mostly because we had quite high violence on Friday. So I think a lot of people were scared, and in a way, the protests were hijacked by these far-right groups. So I think the biggest, I would say, sign will be how many people we will see on Monday, Tuesday. And I think if these protests then generate more people, then we could see that the protests will continue or they will grow. But these protests reasonably may have the fate of the protests from last year, because we also had anti-government protests last year. They were called one of 5 million, that they were also against the government, but these protests also didn't have any kind of leadership. So they were also quite locally driven at the beginning. And at one point, opposition parties joined the protest and in a way hijacked the protest. And as opposition parties joined the protest, then the whole movement itself started to collapse and people were simply not interested enough to take part in it. So in a way, I think on one side, it's great that the citizens are the ones who are initiating the protests. But on the other hand, it's quite sad that this protest actually never lead to any kind of change simply because there is no leadership and vision behind it. And you cannot run protests like days and days without clear strategy or idea where is this heading and how things will be achieved. And this is, I think, the biggest struggle now with this protest. But also, I think similar things, even if this stops this week, it is a question what will be in the fall. Because there, I think more and more people will realize that the economy is quite poor and there will be quite a lot of consequences of COVID in terms of unemployment and other forms of dissatisfaction. So I'm sure that at one point in the near future, this sort of citizen disobedience will continue. In which form, it's quite really difficult to predict.
Yeah, I think as well, I agree, like, but also I do think that, like, the government is going to come down harder, because I was reading that they've been buying drones from China, they've been buying all this kind of spy stuff from China, like, it doesn't look good.
Yeah, so I always sometimes half joke, but half serious. I was often referring to Serbia as a surveillance state. Why surveillance state? Simply because it's a post-communist country. So we were for a long time a surveillance states for real. During communism, in a way, taping someone was quite a legit business. As in every communist state, and the government and the police and the citizens, they were all working into this surveillance concept to trying to beat the enemy, as in Albania, as in East Germany, as elsewhere where the communism was. And then during Milosevic time, we also had quite heavy surveillance states. So Milosevic was also a former communist, and he kept some of the elements of communism, and surveillance was one of it. And then this simply continued during democratic transition, so to say. Now, this surveillance is just upgraded in a sense that you have modern technology to do it. And you're probably referring to the fact that Serbia bought this surveillance system from China, Huawei, on public cameras and facial recognition. The issue we have with that is that simply that whole process is not transparent. So how Serbia did this, they signed a memorandum of understanding with China. And through this memorandum, they basically got the equipment. And because it's a business deal, it's not, they don't require to have it open for the public. So we don't know how many cameras, how much money, what is the technology. So we are only assuming things around it, which then leads us to the thing that we are, of course, suspectful of what is the aim of this surveillance system. And we know how surveillance systems work, not just in China, but also in other countries of Europe, where it can easily be abused for by the government for violation of basic rights.
Right, it's the same with the weapons, right? Like I read here, they bought weapons from China, Russia, and France. And a lad I was talking to basically said that like those weapons have trickled down to the police. And there's, you know, like how in America, like there's a very kind of like militarization of the police. People are saying that's happening in Serbia as well. It's not just that they're brutal, they're getting like, you know, military grade equipment almost.
I don't know in details about how much of the equipment, but definitely the Serbian police and army are getting a lot of equipment from Russia traditionally, then also now from China. And in overall, I would say that Serbian police is quite militarized already. It's just that they didn't have an opportunity so much until now to use this weapon on Serbian citizens. So we used it heavily during the 90s. For example, Kosovo War, that was 70% is police. War crimes and everything that happened around Kosovo, it is mostly done by the police and special police unit. After that, they were not so much using violence on citizens, direct violence, but they were definitely an abusive system. So a lot of people were abused by police, but I would say more on this general level, not so much in terms of arms and military force that they had. But obviously, I mean, we now see that they can use force as well if there is a need. But also, I mean, Serbia itself is a big producer of arms. We don't need necessarily to import anything from China or Russia. We produce it as well. So in that sense, I wouldn't worry about them getting weapons and arms from anywhere.
Right, they've already got them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. A lot of people have been messaging me about this and saying, is there going to be a war in Serbia? And I'm like, no, like, calm down, relax. However, the one thing that I do find interesting is that like the Balkans is getting very unstable. So there's these clashes in Serbia. There's a thing in Bulgaria the other day. Like Kosovo has basically had like a kind of a soft coup. I don't know, like everything feels a little bit unstable. As someone that covers that area, what do you think? Do you think that's right? Or is it just, you know, typical Western Europe just thinking everything's bad in the Balkans?
Yeah, yeah, true. But I think, yeah, it definitely is not stable. But I don't like to use the word stable for that same reason, because what's the issue with the West is that they often try to get stability and then they sacrifice everything. And I think this is the response to it. So the Europe often always wanted Western Balkans to be secure, and then they undermined rule of law and democracy for the sake of security. And they were trading this with our authoritarian leaders. And now the authoritarian leaders, not just in Serbia, but as you mentioned, in Kosovo, in Montenegro, partially in Bosnia, Bulgaria as well, they realized that they're way too powerful and that they don't necessarily need European Union to tell them what is good or bad for their country. And I think this is in a way response to this policy. Western Balkans was never, so to say, peaceful area, because there were a lot of issues after the conflict that were not tackled. So in a way, it was always in some sort of a transition into the post-conflict society and into the democracy. But this transition never fully, it was never fully implemented. And we had this authoritarian tendencies that were building up, plus the different economic hardships, then different circumstances. For example, a lot of people are poor, they cannot travel, there's a low level of employment, so different factors influencing the people and in general their way of living. So a lot of people are now just want to leave the Balkans. A lot of them also left for Western Europe, and the one that stayed are quite unhappy, and in a way I think the things are boiling because people don't see that things are moving forward. You know, I remember like 5 or 6 years ago or 10 years ago, people would say, okay, like in 5 years we will join European Union, so all the sacrifice is worth it. So they were in a way waiting for something good to happen. And you have this transition that lasts for 20 years and you don't see this bright future. So in a way, people, a lot of them feel like hopeless because, European Union is in crisis itself. Then there's a lot of different players in the region, Russia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia as well, who are in a way luring people more towards them. So all societies, I think, are quite divided. So in that sense, I don't think it will be war, but definitely civil unrests. And I'm 100% sure for Kosovo, for example, that we can see something like that, especially with the new war crimes court in The Hague. How the government was basically removed from power was a sort of a coup. Then Montenegro as well. There we have a person who is ruling that country for almost 30 years. And opposition doesn't see any way to enter the political life except through violence. Bosnia, I think it's embarrassing to say, but it's like divided country since the war. And there is no like willingness either from inside or outside to change this. So in that sense, I think it will be definitely unstable. But war, I really doubt it. There is no there is no arms first to do it. But there is also, I think, for a war to happen, leaders would need to be ready to do it. And for now, I don't think that any of the leaders of the Western Balkans would go into the war simply because they find the situation perfect for them. They can be authoritarian, they can stay in power and live in peace.
Sure, but I meant in terms of war, I just meant like the people, you know what I mean? Like I don't think it's going to happen either, but like if it did, I would see it something like that, right? Like militias, the people just go, right, the only way is boom, like militias or whatever, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. But I don't, for me, what you say, the war, for me, that's civil unrest. That for sure. Protests, violence, yes, definitely. But also, I think for many people in the Balkans, the war was not so long ago. So in that sense, we also have to think about that, that a lot of people lived through war, and for them, that's the true horror. And I think a lot of people fear of that. So in that sense, this is, in a way, a prevention factor for many of these unrests to develop into a real conflict.
Yeah, hopefully not. Surely Russia is kind of loving all this right now.
Yeah, but Russia was always in the region. That's what I often, when people, because a lot of people like to ask this Russian influence, etc., thinking that Russia is bringing some extra propaganda to the region, but it's not. Simply because Russia was always present in the region. When I say always, I mean historically present. So they were there through World War I, World War II, Balkan Wars as well, the first Balkan Wars. And they were quite a player since forever. And they always had friends in the Balkans, and they always had enemies in the Balkans. And with friends, it was all friends, so to say. It was always easy to manipulate them. And I often like to say for Serbia that Serbia has this special love affair with Russia, which means that Serbs love Russians simply as their brothers. So it's not a rational relationship. It's something that you have emotion towards something for some reason, but you don't need to necessarily rationalize it. This is how, if you would ask random people in Serbia what do they think of Russia, they would tell, these are our Orthodox brothers. We have been together through the history, and they're on our side always.
Yeah, when I went to the Serbian side in Mitrovica, there was like the first thing you see is like a 50-foot poster of Putin hanging off of like a block of flats, like, and there's just Russian flags everywhere. Like it's more like fanatic rather than logical, like you said. Like a football team.
Yes, and also it's the same thing that I was explaining previously, that in general, people here always liked authoritarian leaders. So we always had someone who was perceived as the ruler of everything. Usually the power was always one person. So in that sense, Putin is seen as someone who is very powerful, who confronts the West. And this is the narrative that has been feeding in Serbia like for years.
Right, the strong man.
Exactly, yeah. It's a patriarchal society in a way, still. And, Putin with, in Serbia, it's quite popular, his pictures where he is half naked.
Yeah, riding a horse.
Exactly, because this is like a typical Balkan man as well. This warrior that is going through difficult situations, but at the end he wins because he's strong and wise.
I mean, I'm laughing about it there, and it is kind of comical, but it's all very well, like, Western European guy laughing at it, but it's working, right? It's working over there.
Yeah, exactly. But it is working because this is the narrative that everyone is feeding.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Okay, before I let you go, is there anything else you think we should mention that we haven't yet?
I think we covered a lot of it, yeah.
Yeah, it's been really, really interesting. That's exactly what I needed because I was trying to research and talking to so many people. And what I will say is, like, the people from Serbia have been so helpful, like messaging me. But like you've been saying, everyone has a different reason why this is happening, or at least a different like angle on the protest. So it's been quite confusing, you know.
Exactly. It's also confusing for us, but yeah. But this was a nice discussion, quite different than the usual one.
Where can people get hold of you if they want to follow your work on Twitter or wherever?
Yeah, on Twitter. Yeah, I'm on Marianne R.
So Marian_R, right? MARIEN_R. Okay, thank you very much, Maria. That's really helpful.
Thank you. Bye.
That was Marija Ristić talking about the clashes in Serbia and the very complex situation that's unfolding there on the ground still. Last night there were clashes, things are kind of winding down, but from what people have said to me on the ground, everyone is still very angry and this could just be the start of something much bigger. If you like what we're doing at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us on the Patreon. We are 100% independent. We do not take money from corporate backers, even though they're sniffing around these days. Fuck that. So go to patreon.com/popularfront. There are bonus episodes. There is access to the community Discord. You get episodes before the people. There's also a new thing that we're starting soon. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, the title is, but the thing is serious. So it's called Too Cool for J School. J School being journalism school. And what we're doing is we're kind of going to do like a video series, kind of teaching people basics of conflict journalism, things you might want to know if you're in a protest, things you might want to know if you somehow end up on the front line, like what plates do you need, how can you help yourself not get wrecked by tear gas, good books that might help you, you know, educate yourself on various conflicts all around the world. So yeah, there's going to be a few of us doing it. I think it would be cool. I'm going to introduce that in about 2 weeks. It will be Patreon exclusive, Patreon only. So yeah, patreon.com/popularfront. If you want to support us in a different way, you can go to popularfront.co, like counter-offensive CO, /support. popularfront.co/support. You can do it on Bitcoin, donations, all sorts of stuff. And you know, if you are an independent business and you know you're not treating your workers badly and everything is ethical, and you think that you know what you do might work with Popular Front and you want to shout out, let us know. Email me jake@hanrahan.tv, HANRAHAN. We're very cheap considering the amount of people are listening to us. We're not trying to fuck anybody over, but we are trying to keep moving forward and making better stuff. So yeah. Sponsors in this episode were Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. Check them out. They're an independent coffee shop selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. Tell them Popular Front sent you. Also, Grindcore House, a pair of coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA. One in the south, one in the west. Check them out on social media at Grindcore House. This episode is also sponsored by Reaper Feed. It's basically a site reporting on the kind of unusual sides of human conflict, from the favorite wristwatch of terrorists to interviews with warlords. Check them out at reaperfeed.com or on Instagram and Twitter at reaperfeed1. If you want to follow us on social medias, go to instagram.com/popular.front. twitter.com/popularfrontco, youtube.com/popularfront. The Capitol Hill Occupy Protest doc will be out by the weekend. So yeah, go there, or if you want, just go to popularfront.tv. It will take you to the same place. The website, everything there, popularfront.co. And you know, there are articles on the website, but from now on, now that we've started the zine, all articles will just be in the zine in the physical form. There will not be an online form. A lot of people are not happy about that, but you know, that's how it is. It's kind of an experiment, I guess. You know, I think that there's a lot of currency in physical media still, and it's nice to actually hold the product in your hand. And why not pay for it and have it and read the articles rather than just read it off the screen? Like, I hate doing that myself. So we're only doing the articles now in the zine, and it looks a lot nicer. You collect it, whatever. The first issue of the zine is completely sold out. Please stop asking me to do reruns of it. We already did one rerun and I'm still in my house packing them. Like, I can't do it. So the next issue will be out at the end of August. Got a lot of good people working on that. So just keep your eyes open for it. And when it does go on sale, like, grab it. Because I did give people like 5 weeks pre-orders and then an extra week pre-order. And people are still saying, oh, I missed it. Well, there, sorry, like, that's how it is. If you want to keep your eye on the zine stuff, probably best to do it on the instagram.com/popular.front. Thank you to the following high tier Patreons. They are Ian Frois, James Cully, Michael Ackerman, Ethan Reyes, Fitz Madrid, Joe Watt, Chandler Malin, Alex Northrop, Ed Coulthard, Johnny LaFleur, Clayton Taylor, Hugo Newski, Maxwell Burke, BR_EN86, The Robot, Anthony Kubarik, Don Wayne, Liam Williams, Fragile Feeling, Chris Cusimano, Sebastian from the Discord, Degenerate Zero Alpha, sorry, get them names in the right order, Chris Davis, DR, Trey Nance, Charlie, Olin Thorne, Amy Rupert, Rubicon, Prashant Singh, Azad, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Christina Rivetti, Josh from the Discord, Moody Al Rashid, Bill Wilson, Emiliano, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Ari from the Discord, Young Wasabi, Sarusha Hawazi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, Scartoon Music, Stephen Davila, Patrick Bronte, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Q Ball, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Emily Molly, Axel Iverson from Iceland, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, Daniel Shearer, and Joanna Stocker. Thank you all very much. Without your help, this would all definitely fall apart very quick. So thank you. Again, if you want to support us, get loads of extra content, go to patreon.com/popularfront. I really don't see it as like, oh yeah, you're giving them money to keep moving forward as charity. It's basically a subscription service because we put so much extra content out there. So yeah, I mean, it's subscribe, I would say. Subscribe on the Patreon, patreon.com/popularfront. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black, aka Son of Old. Check his music at samblackpf.com.